What would you do if you gave someone everything only to be left standing at the altar alone? Imagine the pain of pouring years of your life into someone only to watch them walk away. But what if they didn't just walk away? What if they moved on with someone else? And what if on the day they were supposed to marry that person, you showed up silent, calm, and ready to make them pay? Have you ever been betrayed so deeply that it felt like the world was collapsing around you? What would make someone snap? And how far would they go when love turns into heartbreak? This isn't just another wedding story. This one is about a woman, 54 years old, from Australia, who had given everything to a man who promised her the world. But on the day he said, "I do," to someone else, she decided to take matters into her own hands. And what she did next will leave you questioning everything about love, loyalty, and vengeance. Stick around because this story is more than just shocking. It's a story of a love so powerful it drove a woman to make an irreversible choice. What would you do if your heart was broken this way? Meet Michelle Sullivan, a 54-year-old woman from Sydney, Australia, whose life appeared simple on the surface, but was filled with a quiet yearning. A well-respected nurse, Michelle had built a reputation for her dedication and care. She spent long hours at the hospital, her hands healing and comforting those in pain. While her own heart quietly carried a burden, Michelle's life was marked by devotion. Devotion to her family, her faith, and her work. She'd raised her children with love and discipline, always putting their needs first. Her marriage too had once been built on promises, but it ended in a way that left her more guarded, more cautious. The divorce had left its mark, and though she never spoke of it, Michelle struggled with the loneliness that followed. Her children were grown and independent now, leaving Michelle with an empty house and an empty feeling. Despite her strong faith, which kept her grounded, Michelle longed for something more, a companion, a partner who would share her life. She kept these desires to herself, believing that a woman her age could only hope for small, quiet moments of happiness. She had learned to settle for a life that felt safe but left her heart unfulfilled. But then everything changed when she met him. James Cooper, 27, was everything Michelle wasn't expecting, but everything she would come to need. Ambitious, charming, and full of dreams. James had an energy about him that was both infectious and undeniable. He was the kind of man who made things happen. Always moving forward, always reaching for something bigger. His bright future seemed set. But behind the polished exterior, there was more to him than just ambition. It all started years ago when James walked into Michelle's life, just beginning to carve out his career. He was young, eager, and full of stories about his struggles. At first, Michelle saw him as a man she could help, a project of sorts. He was driven, but lacked the support and guidance he needed to reach his full potential. She didn't mind offering her help. Her nurturing nature kicked in, and before long, Michelle was offering him advice, a warm meal, and guidance on the little things that often go overlooked. James was drawn to her warmth, her kindness, and her genuine care. He admired her strength, the way she balanced her demanding job with her faith and volunteer work. She was the kind of woman who seemed to have it all figured out. And for James, that was both comforting and inspiring. What began as a simple mentorship soon began to evolve into something more profound. James began to rely on Michelle, not just for guidance, but for emotional support. He found solace in her presence, and she in turn began to feel needed again. A feeling that had been missing from her life for a long time. The more they spent time together, the more Michelle saw something in James that touched her heart deeply. She saw him as the son she never had. A man who needed her help. Someone who was lost in a world that didn't seem to have room for him. Their connection grew stronger, more personal. Michelle didn't just see a young man who needed advice. She saw someone who would become an integral part of her life. And for James, Michelle was more than just a mentor. She became a source of comfort, stability, and a kind of love he hadn't known before. What started as a relationship built on guidance soon turned into a complex emotional bond. But as in all things that seemed too good to be true, this bond would eventually face its breaking point. And Michelle unknowingly was about to find herself in a story where giving everything might not be enough. As the months passed, Michelle's role in James' life grew deeper. What started as simple gestures of support blossomed into something more substantial. Michelle, with her nurturing instincts and genuine affection for James, began to pour herself into his future in ways she had never done for anyone else. James struggled with debt from student loans and living expenses, and Michelle didn't hesitate to step in. She paid off his bills, clearing the weight of financial burdens that had held him back. There was no hesitation on her part. She saw his potential, and to her this was just another way to show him that he wasn't alone, that someone believed in him. It didn't stop there. His car broke down. And Michelle, seeing the stress it caused him, took it upon herself to buy him a new one. It wasn't a luxury car, but a reliable sedan, one that would get him where he needed to go. He protested at first, but Michelle insisted. She wanted him to be able to focus on his dreams, not on the practicalities of getting from one place to another. James' ambition burned brightly, but he didn't have the means to fuel it. Michelle, though, had the resources, and soon she was paying for his education, covering his application fees, textbooks, and even the cost of extra certifications that would help him climb higher in his career. She believed in him, in his drive, and his promise. Her investment in James wasn't just financial, it was emotional, too. Every gesture she made was rooted in a desire to help him build the life he'd always wanted. But what Michelle didn't see, or perhaps didn't want to acknowledge, was that James was starting to take more than just her support. He was becoming a permanent fixture in her life. Every meal, every financial decision, every word of encouragement was reinforcing her belief that this man, this young man, was someone worth sacrificing for. But James, he was beginning to view her not as a partner, but as someone he could lean on, someone who made his life easier, who removed obstacles from his path, and who unknowingly was giving him everything he wanted. While Michelle was giving him everything she had, James' heart was becoming more distant. And as the emotional and financial support piled up, Michelle's affection deepened, leaving her blind to the shifts in their relationship that would soon change everything. As the months passed, the dynamic between Michelle and James began to shift in ways Michelle wasn't prepared for. At first, it was small things, subtle changes that seemed insignificant at the time. James, once eager to spend time with her, began to take more and more late nights out. He'd tell her he was working late or meeting friends, but his explanations became more vague, and his arrival times grew later and later. Michelle tried to brush it off. After all, he was building his career. He had big dreams, and she understood that. She had supported him all along, so why should this be any different? But something didn't sit right in her gut. There were no more spontaneous dinners or quiet evenings together. Instead, he was out more often, and when he came back, he seemed distracted, his mind always elsewhere. The unannounced trips started happening, too. James would tell her he was going out of town for work or to visit friends, and Michelle, ever the supportive partner, didn't question him. But as the trips became more frequent, and the details about where he was and who he was with became less clear, Michelle felt the familiar stirrings of doubt creep into her heart. Still, she tried to convince herself it was nothing. He was young. He was focused on his future, and he'd never given her any reason to doubt him before. So, she ignored the red flags, kept telling herself everything was fine. Then came the most noticeable change. James began pulling away emotionally. He stopped expressing his affection as freely as he once had. The sweet words of "I love you" that Michelle had grown so accustomed to hearing became less frequent. When he did say them, they lacked the warmth they once carried. His kisses became less tender, his embraces shorter. It wasn't that he was being cruel. He still did the little things that reassured her, like buying her flowers or sending a text to check in during the day. But Michelle noticed the distance. He wasn't the same James she had helped build a life for. Michelle's heart told her something was wrong. But her mind, clouded with hope, dismissed the warning signs. He was busy, she thought. He was under stress, juggling work and his career. He still loved her, didn't he? He always said the right things when she asked, always reassuring her with a smile, a laugh, or a touch on the shoulder. "I'm just tired," he'd say. "You know I love you, right?" But despite the words, Michelle couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The more she tried to fill the growing gap between them with understanding and patience, the more the silence between them grew. Yet, she ignored it. The life she had built with James had been so perfect, so full of hope. To face the truth would mean admitting that the foundation she had so carefully laid was starting to crumble beneath her feet. And so she kept giving, kept waiting, and kept hoping that the James she once knew would come back to her. But little did she know, the man she was holding on to was slipping further away with each passing day. It had been years of giving, years of sacrifice, of quietly believing that one day all of it would pay off. Michelle had stood by James through thick and thin, supporting him financially, emotionally, and physically. She had poured everything into him, convinced that their bond was unbreakable. But then one day, the unthinkable happened. It came in the form of a simple message, a notification that pierced through Michelle's daily routine like a knife. James, the man she had nurtured, the man she had helped build, was getting married to someone else. Sophia, a name Michelle had never heard before, but one that now echoed in her mind with haunting clarity. Sophia was younger, vibrant, and from a world so different from Michelle's. A world filled with wealth and social circles Michelle could never touch. Michelle's world had always been rooted in work, faith, and quiet sacrifice. Sophia seemed to sparkle with ease and glamour, the kind of life James had always hinted he wanted. Michelle stared at the message for a long time, her fingers frozen on the phone. The room around her seemed to blur as her mind tried to make sense of what she was reading. After everything, after all the years of devotion, James was choosing someone else. And he wasn't just choosing anyone. He was choosing a life Michelle could never provide. A life that felt like a direct contradiction to the one Michelle had helped build with her own hands. The shock hit her like a wave crashing against a cliff. Everything she had done for James, all the sacrifices, the late nights, the money, the love, it all came crashing down in that moment. He was leaving her. No explanation, no apology, just a simple announcement. He was moving on. For Michelle, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a betrayal of everything she had given. Her mind raced with images of James walking down the aisle, laughing with someone else, promising forever to another woman. The thought of him standing before his guests, making vows to someone who hadn't been there through the sleepless nights, the debts, the struggles, made her blood run cold. Michelle had given him everything she had, and in return, he was offering his future to someone else. The man she had built her life around was now building a future without her. Days later, the wedding invitation arrived. The envelope was cream-colored, elegant. But the moment Michelle saw it, her heart sank. It wasn't just any invitation. It was a symbol of everything she had lost. Everything she had worked for. She opened it with trembling hands, her eyes falling on Sophia's name, the name of the woman who would now share everything with James. Her vision blurred, the words on the page twisted in front of her eyes. Her throat tightened, and she struggled to breathe. Sophia and James. The new couple, the new life, the new everything. The betrayal felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. The invitation felt like a slap in the face, a cruel reminder that Michelle had given everything for a man who had never truly belonged to her. Sophia, a name that now embodied all her fears, the woman who would take what Michelle had helped build. The woman who would now be the recipient of everything Michelle had sacrificed. In that moment, the pain was too much to bear. The dream she had held on to for so long shattered in an instant, and Michelle felt like she was drowning in the reality that James had moved on without her, leaving her with nothing but a wedding invite, a broken heart, and an aching sense of betrayal. The engine hums as Michelle's car cuts through the quiet morning. The road ahead long and lonely. The landscape outside the window fades in and out, but inside her mind is consumed with a whirlwind of thoughts. Her hands grip the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white from the pressure. She doesn't know what she's doing or where exactly she's headed. She only knows one thing. She has to get to that wedding. Her heart pounds in her chest as the miles tick by. But it's not the drive that's hard. It's the pain. Pain from years of giving, of loving, of investing everything she had in a man who was now slipping away, never to return. She wonders if she ever truly had him, or if she'd been the one who had always given too much. Every sacrifice, every moment of tenderness now feels like a lie, a lesson in heartbreak. The radio plays softly in the background, but Michelle isn't listening. Her thoughts are too loud. The invitation, Sophia's name, still burns in her mind. How could he do this? How could he stand there pledging his future to someone else? Her eyes glance briefly at the rear-view mirror, catching her reflection. A woman who had given everything, only to be left standing alone, and still she drives. Every mile feels like a countdown. The venue is grand, more beautiful than anything Michelle could have imagined. An upscale garden ceremony nestled in the heart of Sydney, surrounded by lush greenery and delicate blooms. Soft music floats through the air, and guests mingle in their finest attire. Glasses of champagne in hand, laughter echoing through the courtyard. The scene looks perfect. Picture perfect, in fact. A dream come true for any bride. But for Michelle, this isn't a dream. It's her nightmare unfolding before her eyes. She steps into the garden unnoticed by the crowd. Her presence almost lost amidst the sea of guests. No one sees her. No one hears her quiet footsteps as she walks to an empty seat at the back of the garden. All eyes are fixed on the bride Sophia, who glides down the aisle in her white gown, her smile wide and radiant, her future just beginning. Michelle's gaze, however, is locked on one person, James. Standing at the altar, wearing a custom tuxedo, his face flushed with happiness, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He's the man she built a life with, the man she trusted, and now he's giving it all away. Her chest tightens as she watches him exchange vows with Sophia. Each word, each promise, stabbing her like a knife. To have and to hold from this day forward. His words echo in her ears, but they sound hollow, empty, like a betrayal wrapped in a vow. As the ceremony progresses, Michelle's eyes never leave James. Time seems to stretch and warp as she watches the man she once adored stand before the woman who was now his future. The tears she had fought to hold back begin to gather in her eyes. But she doesn't cry. She doesn't let herself. Instead, she takes a deep breath, calming the storm within her. And then she does the unthinkable. Michelle's purse, which had rested silently on her lap, feels heavier now. Her hands tremble slightly as she slowly reaches into it, feeling the cold metal of the gun that she had brought with her. She doesn't know what she expected. But she doesn't stop. The moment is already here. The years of sacrifice. The years of betrayal, it all led to this. Her fingers wrap around the grip and she draws the gun slowly from the bag. The weight of it feels familiar, almost comforting in her hands. She doesn't look at it. She looks at James, focused, determined. Everything slows. The world, the voices, the ceremony. It all fades into a blur. There's only James. And then in one fluid motion, Michelle aims. The sound of the gunshot is deafening, sharp against the serene garden. James stumbles, his eyes wide in shock as the bullet strikes him. He gasps for air, clutching his chest, his hands now stained with blood. His body crumples, collapsing to the ground. Screams erupt from the guests. The once beautiful ceremony is shattered in an instant. The bride, Sophia, screams in terror, running for safety, her veil flapping wildly as she flees. Panic spreads like wildfire through the crowd. People scatter, knocking over chairs. Some hiding behind pillars, others pulling out their phones to capture what no one ever imagined they would witness. But Michelle doesn't move. She stays in her seat, calm and still, as chaos unfolds around her. Her heart beats loudly in her chest, but she doesn't feel fear. She feels nothing but the certainty of what she's done. James is on the ground, struggling for breath. His life draining away. He looks up at her, his eyes filled with disbelief and regret. Michelle stands slowly, her movements deliberate. She walks toward him, her eyes never leaving his. He gasps, his lips trembling as he tries to speak, but his words are swallowed by the blood that pools beneath him. Michelle kneels beside him, her hand reaching out to touch his cheek. One last time, she whispers, her voice steady and cold. I gave you everything. And you left me. You left me for her. And then in the midst of the chaos, she stands up. She doesn't run. She doesn't look back. She knows what she has done. The world around her may be falling apart, but for Michelle, it's finally over. The sirens wail in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. But Michelle doesn't flinch. She simply watches as the man she loved, who had betrayed her, is left to die. In the midst of the chaos, where guests are running, screaming, and pulling out their phones to record the unimaginable, Michelle remains eerily calm. The world seems to move in a blur around her. But for Michelle, everything has slowed down to a complete stop. She walks toward James, her steps deliberate, each one echoing through the chaos like the ticking of a clock. She kneels beside him, her hands steady despite the blood. Now staining the pristine ground. James, struggling to breathe, looks up at her. With wide, panicked eyes. His mouth moves, but the words are barely a whisper. Swallowed by his own blood, Michelle's gaze meets his unwavering. She gently touches his cheek, her fingers tracing the same face she had once adored, the same face she had spent years loving and building a life around. For a moment, there's nothing but silence between them. The only sound. The distant wail of sirens drawing closer. And then in that moment, Michelle whispers, her voice soft but resolute, "I gave you everything." She doesn't wait for a response, nor does she need one. The finality of her words hangs in the air like a heavy truth. She had poured her soul into him, given him all of her love, her time, her money, her energy, and in return, he had given her nothing but betrayal. Now, in the face of his life slipping away, she finally feels the weight of her sacrifice lift. The sirens grow louder, signaling the arrival of the authorities. But Michelle doesn't flinch. She doesn't scramble to escape. She doesn't even make a move to run. Instead, she sits there still and composed, waiting for the inevitable. Her hands are folded neatly in her lap. And her eyes remain locked on James, now gasping for breath. His life slipping away with every passing second. There's no desperation in her, no panic. She doesn't regret her actions. This is the moment she had steeled herself for. As the police burst into the garden, guns drawn and voices shouting for everyone to get down, Michelle remains calm. She doesn't resist when they approach her. No frantic attempts to flee, no outburst. She simply stands up, her movement slow and deliberate. When the officers reach her, they quickly cuff her hands behind her back, and she allows it without protest. There's no defiance in her eyes, no pleading. She doesn't even try to explain. She is accepting what she has done, knowing that the consequences are hers to face. The arrest is swift. Michelle's face remains impassive. Her expression unreadable. She looks out at the scene unfolding around her. The chaos, the panic, the blood, and it's almost as if she's disconnected from it all. She's already made her choice, and there is no going back. As they lead her away, the crowd begins to gather, whispering, pointing, trying to make sense of what just happened. Some of them are still filming on their phones, but Michelle doesn't care. She has already paid the price in her mind. Now it's just a matter of the law catching up. And as the officers escort her toward the squad car, Michelle's eyes remain steady. The silence between her and the world growing louder with every step. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with tension as the trial of Michelle Sullivan unfolded. It was a case that had captivated the entire nation. Everyone wanted to know what drove a woman to shoot her former lover on his wedding day. The cameras clicked away. And the press huddled together in the back, eagerly awaiting each new twist. Michelle sat quietly at the defense table, her face calm, her eyes steady as the proceedings began. Her lawyer sat beside her, preparing for the battle ahead. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, waiting to hear both sides of the story. The public had their opinions, but now the facts would unfold. The prosecution went first, painting Michelle as cold, calculating, and obsessive. They argued that Michelle had meticulously planned the murder, that she had been driven by jealousy and a deep need to control James' life. They showed images of the wedding, of James' life with Sophia, and of Michelle's apparent willingness to sacrifice everything for a man who ultimately left her. She took everything from him, the prosecutor argued. Her love, her money, her time, all of it was used to build his future. And when he moved on, when he chose someone else, Michelle's anger consumed her. What we saw in that garden was not a woman scorned, but a woman determined to destroy what she could no longer control. On the other side, Michelle's defense attorney took a different approach. He acknowledged the shooting, but reframed Michelle's actions through the lens of years of emotional abuse and betrayal. He presented her as a woman who had given everything for a man who used her for his own benefit and then tossed her aside without a second thought. The defense didn't deny Michelle's guilt, but asked the jury to understand the years of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional destruction she had endured. Michelle Sullivan is not a cold-blooded killer, her lawyer argued. She is a woman who loved a man for 10 years. A man who took everything from her. A man who promised her a future only to break that promise and walk away without so much as a goodbye. Yes, she snapped. But who among us wouldn't after being left with nothing but broken promises and a shattered heart? The courtroom grew even more tense as witnesses took the stand. First was Candace, the bride. She was dressed in black, her eyes red from crying. She spoke in a shaky voice, trying to hold it together as she explained the devastation of what happened. "I never saw it coming," Candace said, her voice cracking. "We were supposed to be starting a life together. He was everything to me. And then she took him from us. She took everything. She destroyed our future." Candace's words were filled with anguish, but to Michelle's defense team, they only served to highlight the depth of her betrayal. The jury watched carefully, some sympathetic to Candace. Others beginning to understand the pain Michelle had felt all these years. Next, Michelle's niece, Malika, took the stand. Malika, composed and articulate, spoke about her aunt with a mix of sorrow and frustration. "She gave him everything," Malika said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "She paid off his debts. She bought him a car, paid for his education. She made him her priority and he used her. He told her he loved her and in return he left her for someone else. She loved him and in the end that love wasn't enough. It wasn't even acknowledged. He didn't even thank her." Malika's testimony painted a clearer picture of Michelle's heartache. The years of sacrifice that led to a moment of desperation. After days of intense testimony, the jury began their deliberation. The case was complex, filled with conflicting emotions. Michelle's defense team made a strong argument that she had been emotionally destroyed, driven to her actions by years of betrayal. The prosecution, however, painted her as a woman who had planned her revenge carefully, carrying out the shooting in cold blood. The jury deliberated for just under 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was read. Guilty of second-degree murder. Michelle was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the words sank in. Michelle's face remained impassive as the judge handed down the sentence. She did not flinch, nor did she speak. Her defense team immediately expressed their intention to appeal. But Michelle made no attempt to stop them. She simply nodded as if the finality of the moment had already settled deep within her. The case sparked heated debates across the country. People couldn't stop talking about Michelle, about her love for James, her sacrifices, and the shocking decision she made that day. Was she justified? Was she the victim of a cruel betrayal, pushed too far, or was she a woman consumed by obsession, willing to destroy everything in her path? Some saw her as a tragic figure, a woman who had been so deeply hurt that she lost herself in the pain. Others saw her as a monster, a woman who took justice into her own hands without regard for the consequences. But what everyone agreed on was this. The story of Michelle Sullivan wasn't just about love. It was about the limits of sacrifice, the consequences of betrayal, and the point at which emotional pain can push someone beyond the edge. Now Michelle sits in prison, isolated from the world that once revolved around her. Her life, once filled with care and purpose, has been reduced to a quiet existence behind bars. Days blur together as she reflects on the choices she made, the sacrifices, the love, the betrayal, and the irreversible action that followed. Some view her as a monster, a woman who crossed the line, driven by jealousy and rage. But for others, Michelle is a victim of love gone terribly wrong. She gave everything she had only to be discarded. And in the end, her heart shattered under the weight of it all. Her story has divided the public. There are those who empathize with her, seeing the pain and betrayal as an explanation for her tragic actions. But others cannot forgive the final irreversible choice she made. Was she justified? Or was this the result of an obsession she could no longer control? Was Michelle justified in her actions? Or did her obsessive love lead to her downfall? Could she have walked away, found peace, or was she already too far gone by the time the wedding day arrived? Michelle's case forces us to ask difficult questions. When does love stop being a beautiful thing and become an all-consuming force? And at what point does obsession take over and destroy everything in its path? Her story is a haunting reminder of what happens when devotion becomes a prison and the cost of betrayal pushes a person to the edge. What do you think? Was Michelle driven to this point by love, or did she let obsession take over? Leave a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking real stories, because sometimes the truth is more tragic than fiction.